European economy have a future within the framework of the 2012 Free Market Roadshow. We are pleased to host this event at our university, and I hereby would like to call the Vice Rector of our university, Professor Christos Konstantatos, to declare the opening of the conference.
Dear guests, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I am very pleased to welcome you today in this event organized by the Hayek Institute, the Austrian Center, and the University of Macedonia, and some other parts as well. We are perfectly aware of the crisis. We are perfectly aware of the problems Europe is currently running through. So it is, I think, I don't even have to mention it, the importance of a meeting, of a discussion about these issues. Actually, there is much confusion around these days. Nobody really knows about lots of things, and I think our only way out is information, debate, and exchange of ideas. In that respect, I can only welcome this event. I can say thanks for the opportunity to discuss and reflect about all those issues. I would like also to mention an organization participating in the event, the Students for Liberty, who have contributed a lot, and at the same time they are willing to get in further contact with Greek students and promote ideas. They assure me that is an organization for freedom, but not for politics. Finally, I have to thank the organizers and all these people who worked hard for this event and keep things short. So I give the place for the other speakers and wish you a very fruitful evening. Thank you very much.
I would like to call Mr. Christian Gonza, who is the commercial attaché of the Austrian Embassy, who wants to greet the conference as well.
I'm happy to join you today, to join the effort of the Free Market Roadshow. It's the 5th Free Market Roadshow, and for the first time in Thessaloniki. Which during 30 days of conferences in 13 European Black Sea and Caspian region cities gathers more than 100 international speakers on the panels. The initiative was started by the Austrian Economic Center, an institution which acts in the spirit of the so-called Austrian School of Economics in the 19th century. Among the first to speak about free market theory, economic cycles, and crisis. I present before you Advantage Austria, the foreign markets brand name of the Austrian Chamber of Commerce, fostering Austrian exports in Greece. We have about 100 outlets all over the world, and this is the biggest network worldwide, except that of the United States of America. So we are a small country, but we have a big export network. We try in our everyday work to fulfill a task similar to the Free Market Roadshow, to go to the local markets, to try to understand, to translate, to mediate, and to overcome obstacles in the way of free economic trade and economy in general. We all know that in Greece there have been obstacles for free trade and services, only to mention closed professions, blind bureaucracy and unclear legislation, tax legislation especially. I hope we will hear a lot of ideas to overcome that obstacles in today's discussions. Thank you.
Before proceeding with this very important topic concerning the future of the European economy, we would like to start off with a brief musical interlude. We proudly present Mr. Konstantinos Destounis, who is majors in piano performance at the Department of Music, Science and Art of our university. After having received numerous national acknowledgements, Konstantinos represented Greece at the 2010 Eurovision contest of classical music in Vienna, and also became the European Piano Vice Champion at the Continental Piano Championship held in Germany this year. Konstantinos will be performing the first movement of Beethoven's Sonata, Opus 10, number 3, titled Presto. Enjoy Konstantinos' performance. And now it is time to discuss if the European economy does indeed have a future. Through our three panel discussions, our international speakers will try to find answers to this question. During these panel sessions, you, the audience, will be given the opportunity to comment, discuss, and pose questions to our speakers as well. For the first panel discussion, titled Individualism versus Collectivism, How Much Government Can We Afford?, I would like to call Professor Konstantinos Karfakis, Mr. Matt Kibe, Dr. David Pistrui, and Mr. Charilaos Pitsinis.
We can. No, not yet, because I have to. Okay. Could you please turn down the light? The light, please. The photo. Thank you. Right? No, not so much, because I cannot see. All right.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to welcome you all to our conference here today, and thank you for honoring us with your presence. It is indeed a very important event for our city and our academic life, since we have today with us many insightful and well-known thinkers. My name is Harry Beitsinis. I am an attorney at law and will serve as the moderator of the first panel. The topic of the panel is individualism versus collectivism. How much government can we afford? In the difficult times we live in, the cool and calm evaluation of the current situation and the consistent effort to find solutions is the prerequisite for surpassing the crisis. We are indeed in the middle of a public debt crisis of historical proportion. EU countries are experiencing a full-scale sovereign debt crisis exacerbated by recession, transfers to help banks, and in some cases very poor fiscal management over a number of years that was inconsistent with the principle laid down in the Stability and Growth Pact and the Maastricht Treaty. Those important events came as a shock for Europe as a whole. They have done more than demonstrate that the initial design of the European institutions was defective. They have also revealed fundamental fractures in the socially dominant philosophy of governance, let alone a sense of certain identity among the people locked together in what has become a marriage of convenience. The almost 60 years old welfare state sustained heavy damages as a direct result of the governmental inability to maintain it, leading many important thinkers to believe that its survival is inconsistent with modern-day fiscal responsibility and the nation-state viability. The ensuing structural adjustment programs aimed at reducing the governmental apparatus do not seem to accomplish their proclaimed targets, especially in Greece, mostly because political elites and the average voter simply do not agree with austerity measures. Indeed, most politicians and their electorate came to believe that the exit from the crisis will be accomplished by returning to the old safety valves of governmental spending, inflation, and devaluation in return for lower interest rates. The only problem with this line of thought seems to be that in Greece, excessive governmental spending through inflation and borrowing was the rule of the game for the last 30 years. As a result, a default, an exit from the Eurozone, or even a breakup of the Eurozone itself are now conceivable. The consequent flight to safety threatens a meltdown. As Edward Truman once wrote, we are witnessing a lethal interplay between fears of sovereign insolvency, emerging sovereign illiquidity, and financial stress. Therefore, the inevitable question posed by common sense itself is, what are the causes of this tragedy? Is the free market the one to blame, or the governmental intervention in the market processes? Did the so-called European welfare state contribute to the birth of the crisis, or it can be regarded as part of its cure? Can one solve a public debt crisis by augmenting the state itself, continuing and increasing tax-heavy policies, and borrowing billions? While the crisis deepens, the political spectrum is changing rapidly. With François Hollande as the new French president and the Greeks massively voting for extreme parties, the entire European project is called into question. It's time to discuss the reasons for the current crisis and its implication for the next generation in the light of recent European policies. Our distinguished set of panelists will attempt to answer to all those important questions. We are honored to have here with us a group of well-respected and insightful thinkers. Let me introduce them to you. Our first keynote speaker is Mr. Karfakis. Mr. Karfakis is a professor of economics at the University of Macedonia. Our second keynote speaker is Mr. Matt Kibe. Mr. Kibe is the president and CEO of Freedom Works, a non-governmental organization based in Washington, D.C., dedicated at promoting freedom and limiting the scope of governmental activity. Our third speaker, the podium speaker, is Dr. David Pistrui. Mr. David Pistrui serves as the managing director of Acumen Dynamics, a strategy-based education, training, and research firm that focuses on practical knowledge and skills, helping organizations align vision and strategy with execution and performance. Now, since I happen to be the only barrier between you and our great speakers, it's time to end my introduction by turning the floor over to Mr. Karfakis. Mr. Karfakis, you may begin.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My presentation is about the Greek crisis and the lessons which can be drawn from that experience. As we all know, Greece is the sick member of the Eurozone. And the question which is arising is what we got sick. As a doctor, academically speaking, I want to address that issue and give my own answer. I do know, however, that the Greek people have decided to become skydivers who want to push the limits of aerodynamics for a world champion. In other words, Greek people are willing to jump off the plane without a parachute. And let me predict the hard landing, which is going to be the drachma crash. All right, let me put things from the scratch. Since Greece joined Euro, going back to 2001, everybody was cheerful and salute that decision. At the same time, however, Greece was facing an economic challenge. That challenge was associated with the fact that Greece was abandoning its weak currency, the Greek drachma, and instead adopted a very hard currency, the euro. Let's take a look at this plot. What we can see from this plot is that up to the end of 90s, the drachma was depreciating against the dollar. So we had adopted a very weak exchange rate system. Since then, we adopted the euro, and the euro started to appreciate against the dollar. So looking at this picture, we can imagine what could have followed after then. We established a new exchange rate regime, and Greece suddenly became very uncompetitive. For instance, the cumulative appreciation of the real exchange rate of euro against 28 partners of Greece, the major trading partners, appreciated by 25% based on unit labor cost. What is meant by that? That Greece was losing competitiveness during the last 5 to 10 years. But nobody was bothering that phenomenon. And the reason is the following. The Greek governments, conservatives and socialists who ruled the country during the last 10 years, instead of implementing programs, the so-called structural reforms, to make the economy globally competitive, what they follow were something different. From one hand, they follow stimulus fiscal programs by borrowing heavily on international financial markets. And at the same time, we pursued partisan politics, thus augmenting the fiscal sector, keeping markets close to competition. You know, the result from that bad experience was that Greece has missed the opportunity to become a highly competitive economy, as we say, an extrovert economy. I will take things from the scratch, as I said, by looking at the macroeconomic performance of Greece. Greece has experienced, during the last 10 years, 3 different economic aspects. 2 mild recessions, where the GDP fell by about 6.7%, that's a cumulative fall, a prolonged boom, and the current collapse. During the current collapse, there is no any estimation about the fall of GDP. That's the reason is there the question mark. Looking at this plot, we can see the 2 mild recessions in here, just before the Olympics 2000. The second recession follows up the termination of the Olympics. Then we follow up with it's prolonged boom, an expansion of GDP. Please keep that expansion in mind. And then, after the implementation of the austerity program, the so-called referendums, the economy collapsed. The economy collapsed, and we don't know how long that collapse is going to be. The next question which comes to my mind is, well, that's the microeconomic performance, but what about the fiscal policy over the business cycle? How was the fiscal policy indicators were behaving? The answer is highly expansionary. Government spending increased, fiscal deficit increased, debt increased. Look at the other picture. You can see here the red line is the government spending, the government consumption as a ratio to GDP. We are here, you can see here a huge increase. We can see the deficit down here, which is getting, deep and deep, and we can see the debt. If I was a doctor, medically speaking, and I had a patient who had a blood test, and I was looking at this kind of indicator, I would say you are going to die. But in Greece, nobody was paying attention because everybody was enjoying the nirvana, the state nirvana. And the question was, why Greece borrows so heavily in international capital markets? The answer is of this. Because of the low risk premium, Greece was borrowing at the same rate like Germany for so many years. The international capital markets consider us to be a part of the Eurozone, so there was no risk to lend their monies to Greece. You can see the line. This line here is the difference between the Greek and German long-term interest rates, 10-year bonds. We nearly for so many years close to zero, and then after the global collapse, we have the spread went up. All these beautiful fingers say to me that Greece was out of control, but nobody cared. The real question is, from an academic viewpoint, has government spending shaped consumption, investment, and real GDP? I mean, what was the relation between government spending and the other components of the real economy? I have performed an empirical analysis. I show you in a minute the empirical results. But these results show me the following. The government spending matter for everything happened to the Greek economy during the last 10 years. And that somebody could say the triumph of Keynesianism. Some people would say, salute Keynesianism in Greece. It has given everything. What is meant by that? Look at these beautiful numbers. What you can see there, government affected consumption during the last decade. Government and consumption affect investment. And together they affected GDP. And if you ask me what's wrong with that, I will say, this is a fragile economic model growth. When we stop borrowing on international financial markets, so G collapsed and the whole economy collapsed. That is wrong with that model. We based our prosperity on government borrowing because of the partisan politics which were taking place in Greece for so many years. Well, lessons. So many lessons can be drawn. I will set forth two of them. Government spending was the driving force of the real economy. The government spending led to a fragile, shaky economic growth and led to the current collapse. In other words, the crisis we experience at the moment was caused by a faulty economic approach. It's an approach which nobody wanted to touch. However, Keynes once said, in the long run, we are all dead. And Greece replies, yes, this is true if we follow Keynesian policies. Thank you.
Well, Mr. Karfakis, you had some very compelling and convincing arguments. I would like to ask you, do you believe that the proposed fiscal constitution by James Buchanan, and by meaning that I mean a balanced budget and amendment, for example, could have helped us avoid the crisis?
Well, I don't know if it's time to open up the discussion, but I have a way to, a proposal how to get out of this mess I call the right track. Maybe we'll discuss later on. Okay, so
right.
I will.
So now it's time to move to our second keynote speaker. Mr. Kibe, you might begin. No, sure. No, sure. Not from Panathanathi, though. Sure, yeah.
Well, thank you, Professor, and thank all of you for coming today. It's an honor to be here at the University of Macedonia at such interesting times. Just this week, I think the Greek people face what have to be some of the most important decisions that will affect your lives more than anybody else. And it's important for you to know that. How many of you get your information and your news online? Anybody? Almost everybody. So you guys have heard about this thing called the internet? It's pretty cool. How many of you belong to Facebook? Twitter? Some people tweet here. Think about that world. Think about the world that you live in the moment you log in, where literally nobody can tell you what to do. You choose the information you want. You get the news that you want. If you don't believe what you read, you go somewhere else and get the countervailing argument. If you want to buy something, you're radically liberated to buy whatever you want, whenever you want, from whoever you want. Even when you watch a music video, you get to vote. You saw Lady Gaga's new video? Thumbs up, thumbs down. Nobody got to stop you. Nobody got to tell you what to think or what to do. This is what I consider a perfect example of liberalism, of freedom, of your ability to decide for yourself who you are, what you want to be, what you want to do, and what you think. This is different. When I grew up, we didn't have the internet. In the United States, where I lived, you were wholly dependent on just a few sources and a few top-down institutions that would tell you what to think. The New York Times was the paper of record, and even our local papers always got their information from the New York Times. So imagine the power of just a few people at one newspaper in their ability to control my information, what I understood was happening in my world. We had two political parties that would tell us what to think. And you really didn't have any means of questioning the information that they would provide to you because I didn't have access to that information. And even corporations, you had a tradition where the job you got out of college was a job that you had for the rest of your life. It's not like that anymore. We live in a radically decentralized world where each of you has incredible power that I did not have when I grew up. It's liberating. It's radically democratic in the sense that everybody has a voice in a way that in the old world with top-down institutions and pecking orders and hierarchies, so many people did not have a voice. My favorite liberal thinker is a guy named Friedrich Hayek, and he wrote in the 1940s in this famous debate between individualism and collectivism of what he called the spontaneous order. And he described the process by which individuals in their communities, in their houses, in their local space, had special knowledge, personal knowledge of their circumstances, what they wanted, what they needed, but through peaceful cooperation, you managed as individuals to create something so much bigger and so much better than any of you could have created by yourself. He called this a spontaneous order. I call it a community. A community is a place where people come together in a voluntary way and try to accomplish something that they couldn't accomplish on their own. Think about that today, and think about the debate that we are having here in Greece about the future. Do we continue to go down the path of more debt, more borrowing, more taxation, more government deciding what job you get to have, deciding whether or not you have a job the day you graduate from college. The problem with government and the problem with collectivism is there's always a middleman. No matter how you organize it, there is always someone between you and your choices deciding for you. That's just how it is. Now, I don't know what it's like here, but in the United States, sometimes politicians tell you what you want to hear just to keep their job. Does that happen here? Sometimes? Always. It always happens. And think about what the incentive of any politician is. If you're trying to get elected and you're trying to hold on to power, you will tell people what they want to hear, even if it's not true. One of the main criticisms of liberal economic thinking and using government to solve social problems is the problem of that middleman. That middleman always has his own agenda. He doesn't have your agenda in mind. He has his agenda in mind. And whenever you use government to solve problems that you don't believe that free people in voluntary association can do on their own, you have to understand that they have an agenda too. This is a fundamental problem with using government to solve problems that we might have solved by ourselves. And of course, there's only so many ways that the government can continue to spend money that it doesn't have. You can raise taxes. And surely here in Greece, you're talking about raising taxes. You could even confiscate wealth of some people. But how many times can you do that? How many times can you take everything from someone and expect them to continue to produce wealth that you can take and transfer to somebody else? You can do it once. Maybe you can't do it once because we live in a global economy, and maybe those targeted wealthy people, those targeted corporations, maybe they just pick up and move somewhere else. Maybe they hide their wealth. Does anybody hide their wealth in Greece? Happens all the time, doesn't it? Happens in the United States. All of the challenges that you are faced with today are the same challenges we face in the United States. And it is this question of whether or not we should continue to allow the government to spend money it doesn't have. Should we continue to try to raise taxes again and again and again at the expense of job creation and future opportunities for young people? And go back to what I said at the beginning. Who's going to pay the price tag for all of this? How many of you expect to get the job you want when you graduate? A couple optimists here. How many are worried about that? Well, what if we did something a little bit differently? What if we, instead of promising from the top down that we can continue to spend money we don't have, we'll borrow it, we'll tax it, we'll print it, we'll create more and more phony currency to monetize our debts. What if we did something differently? What if we took that example from your experience, the way you live online, radically democratic, radically free, always choosing, always voicing your opinion, and taking a certain responsibility for your own future? Seems to me like an obvious choice. Seems to me that with the decentralization of information online and an ability to connect with people of like mind, maybe of the same generation, people that are worried about their future, you might be able to change the political course in this country. And I'm talking about a revolution. And I'm not talking about violence. I'm talking about free people coming together to solve problems that your political class will never solve. It can't happen. Their interests are different than yours. They want to protect their power. And sometimes protecting their power is continuing to make promises that they can't possibly keep. Who pays that price? Young people pay that price. We continue to borrow, we continue to spend, we continue to destroy future opportunity on your shoulders. I'll be dead long before you guys are. What happens in the next 5 years affects your life. And the question is, do you want to take responsibility for that? And notice I use the words responsibility. Individualism, liberalism, freedom is not just the right to do whatever you want. It's about taking responsibility It's about creating community, and it's about the compassion to solve problems that political systems don't solve. Hope you guys join me. I want to start a revolution. Thank you.
Mr. Gibi, that was a wonderful analysis of the coordination problem, the Hayekian taxes, in a truly revolutionary spirit. But the time limits are pressuring us a little, so we'll have to move to our next speaker. Mr. Pistrui, you may begin.
Good afternoon. My name is David Pistrui, and the happiest thing that I can tell you is that I'm an entrepreneur and I work for myself. How many of you have ever thought about starting your own business? Let's see a show of hands. How many of your families have businesses? So about a third of you, maybe a little over a third of you. Let me ask you all this question. How many of you like to make your own decisions rather than have your parents or the government make your decisions? Let's have a show of hands. The individual you, sitting in this room today, you are the future of your country, you are the future of Europe, you are the future of the globe. It is not the state, it is not the government. Let me share some firsthand experiences with you. I may have a beautiful American accent, but I have spent half of my life in Europe, and I'm of Romanian ancestry. I tasted communism firsthand. I know what it's like to be hungry and not find food in the market. I've experienced socialism, working with state-run enterprises in Romania, Poland, Hungary. It's frustrating, unproductive, and wasteful. I've also had an opportunity to leave a communist or a socialist environment and engage in market activity, freedom, independence, the ability to make my own decisions, and I encourage you, I urge you, and I compel you to contemplate the power of self-employment, the power of family enterprise, and the power of independent thinking, so that your country, your region, can rise from the ashes in a compelling way, so connected to the richness of your history, and for you as an individual to realize that you can create jobs, you can create wealth, you can create independence. How many of you know who Mark Zuckerberg is? Well, not as many as I thought. Mark Zuckerberg started Facebook in his dorm, in his dormitory. Why not leave this session today, meet with your friends over a glass of beer or a Coca-Cola, and talk about opportunities that you see in the marketplace to meet unmet needs. How many of you have been working in your daily lives or in class or here on campus and seen opportunities to offer a new product or service that would improve people's lives, make things easier, as well as create some wealth? That shift in mindset from dependency and entitlement to I can't speak English today, to emancipation and independence is the only path to a secure and stable nation. This mind shift requires an opportunity orientation, a problem-solving mentality, and a spirit of freedom and independence. How would you like to wake up in the morning completely free, but also have the responsibility to build community, to build wealth, and to share that wealth not through the government, but through your own generosity and your own entrepreneurial spirit? Today is a turning point. You may not realize it, but we are at a point of no return in Europe. Greece is at the forefront. You must realize that not only is your nation looking at you, but the continent of Europe is looking at you. The globe is looking at you with respect and admiration for your culture, but with a sense of uncertainty and a sense of fear and a sense of hope. As Matt said, where will it start? It starts with you, the young people. For it's your future, and it's your responsibility to break the shackles of dependency, mediocrity, complacency, and dependence. How many of you would like to take all of your money and bring it up on the stage and put it in a big pot and allow the four of us to make all of the economic decisions for you? What jobs are available? What options are available in your stores and supermarkets? And how you can travel and where you can travel and who controls the factors of production. Would you like the government to do that, or would you like to do that yourself? As an entrepreneur, there is no greater feeling than getting up in the morning and knowing that my own destiny is in my own hands and that of my family. There's no greater feeling than creating jobs and helping people by helping people help themselves to be creative, innovative, and inspired. In addition to all of that, it's fun. It's fun to be able to get up and realize that you're creating something that is yours and no one else's. It's fun to be able to get up and to not only take, but to also share. Because entrepreneurs, they look across the horizon. As they look across the horizon, they look not for problems, but they look for opportunities. So how can you grow your economy? How can you ascend into a new leadership role for Europe? How can you take your ancient history, your culture, your values, and compel them in new combinations to create new industries, to create new factors of production, and to create socioeconomic capital that is new, fresh, strong, independent, and free. Having lived in communism, having lived in socialism, having lived in a market economy, I can tell you there is only one choice, and that choice is up to you. Thank you.
Mr. Pistroi, that was such an inspiring speech. Thank you very much. Now that our panelists have concluded their presentation, it's time for a discussion to take place. I would like to get back to my first question and rephrase it, put it in a different, more general context and address it to everyone here. The long-awaited collapse of the Greek economy was accompanied by a sudden rise of the support to parties of extreme left and right, a rise of fascism and extremism, a surge of social violence. Do you think that all those consequences of the crisis could have been avoided with the proper policies, with a different set of measures, or even a different strategy of managing the crisis? Mr. Kafakis, you might begin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I don't have an answer to your question, actually. I don't know what would happen if we had followed a different route. What I do know, however, is that we should not be prepared to jump off the plane. You see what I mean? I mean, Greece has only one choice. Let me show, in my view, that choice is about fiscal reforms and structural reforms as the only answer to our future. Greece does not have to follow another way. There is not an easy way out of this mess. We create a mess. We should solve the mess. Clean up everything. It's up to our own hands. Therefore, we shouldn't look at in the past, look to the future. We hope.
It's up to us.
Exactly.
Mr. Kibe?
The biggest problem that the social welfare state faces, not just in Greece, but all over the world, is essentially an intergenerational transfer of wealth from your generation to older generations based on promises that were made before you were born. I think one of the key ways to fix this problem, and there's no pretty, elegant way to fix this problem. You guys are facing this insurmountable wall of debt and promises in a stagnant economy. Can you just grow your way out of it? Probably not. One thing that we are debating in the United States that I think is key to understanding the solution to this is moving away from top-down systems, promises from the government that will take care of your retirement, take care of your health care, maybe provide you a job for life, moving away from that centralized structure where your money goes into this system knowing that by the time you get into the system, you probably won't get it back. This is the most unconscionable transfer of wealth from younger, less healthy people to older, more wealthy people. That's you guys. You're getting screwed right now. Are you pissed off about this?
Too much.
We need to move from a collective system to a individualized system. In the United States, we call from a defined benefit system where somebody, a middleman, usually the government, tells you what you get, and by the way, they can change that at any time they want, to a defined contribution system, a savings account, some sort of retirement plan that you make for yourself. You control that. You own it. You decide whether or not you want to move your money and resources from one place to another. But if we don't do that, if we don't start moving so that all of the unfunded liabilities of your generation and future generations are taken off the books, it's only a matter of time before this system collapses. You got to change the system. The other half of that has to be growth. And you cannot grow an economy by punishing wealth creation. You cannot create jobs by punishing job creators. And this is something that countries in Europe need to come to terms with. If you want to do the things that David is talking about, you need to move to a flat tax system. You need to embrace the liberal principle that justice means treating everybody just like everybody else under the rules of the law. Don't let the middleman, don't let the government, don't let politicians use their discretion to decide who gets what, who is treated in which way, and you encourage people to take risks. You encourage people to put their money into your economy.
It's a very interesting answer. Mr. Pistori, what do you believe?
I believe a collapse is inevitable, and I see it as the bigger the problem, the bigger the opportunity. If I were Greek and I were in your seat, I would be expecting there will be a collapse, and I would be moving progressively as an individual with my family to prepare myself for that. Because the government in this country and other countries in Europe is not prepared to deal with it. They will not know what to do. I saw it in the collapse of the former Soviet Union. And those individuals and those families, what you have to understand is the vast majority, the majority of the job creation and the wealth creation in the world is done by individuals and families, not by the state. Considering that, expecting the worst, and planning through scenario thinking, what can I do to prepare myself, will empower you to look at things in new and different ways. You will have to do it, so you should start today. And you should be discussing this with your families and your friends, and you should individually be planning for what that means for you. The good news is there is an opportunity within this collapse for innovative, creative destruction, bringing together new combinations of resources and capabilities at the individual, family, and community level, not at the state level, because the state will be paralyzed. That will create a variety of opportunities for you as individuals to serve the needs of the people. Example, Romanian economy at the end of Ceausescu, 99% in state control. It collapsed. What happened? The entrepreneur, the farmer, the family pulled together as a socioeconomic unit for survival. What came out of it in the medium and longer term? The empowerment of an entrepreneurial class that radically changed the socioeconomic environment and created new companies, new jobs, and new wealth. You can do the same. You will have to do it, and it will be you young people that will be the engine that will drive that change. Don't be afraid to fail. Fail early to succeed faster. Because failure, I have learned more from my failures. I've started 13 companies, 3 of which still function, and I've learned more from my failure than my success. So empower yourself to be entrepreneurial, but realize the reality of the circumstance and capitalize on it. Be proactive rather than reactive. And if you need some ideas, I've got a bunch of them with me. I've been out in your city for the last day and a half walking around, and I've seen millions of business ideas. You have huge opportunities in this city, this region, and this country. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Good luck. If you need help, I'm here.
Thanks a lot. We really appreciate your help, and we will need it in the coming months and years. Well, I have a bunch of questions to ask you, but I think it's time to listen to some questions from our audience. Now, does any member of the audience have something to ask to our panelists? Yes? A microphone, please.
Hello, good evening. Well, as we are talking about governments, I would like to add something in our discussion. We are talking about governments. I would like to add one more meaning in our discussion. I would like to ask you, is it true that nowadays we don't have democracy, but we have corporatocracy? And if that corporatocracy eliminates the power of governments to take decisions, how governments could help the economy and the crisis?
Do you want to ask the whole panel or someone?
The whole panel.
All right. So we should keep the... Okay. David?
Well, first of all, let me start by prefacing, the less government, the better. Because government only gets in the way of the people. So I think that it's important to put it in perspective. Your question about is there democracy? I believe there is democracy. I think that if we give up on democracy, then we've given up on hope. Do you have democracy in Greece? I would ask you.
Seen so many times that decisions have made from corporations. Of course, they are corrupted governments.
Could you please wait for the answer to come?
Yes.
We have a phrase for that in the United States. We call it crony capitalism, and it refers to the collusion of government officials and corporations. There is a whole school of economics called public choice theory that talks about the inevitability of special interests colluding with government because they have a financial incentive to show up and do that. Now here's the dilemma. If you believe in democracy, I believe you have to believe in limited government, because whenever you have a big activist government, the insiders, the corporations, the special interests with more money than you have, they will always show up. They will always get special access because there's no way to control that. As long as somebody is dividing up the spoils of the economy, you can't stop that. And when I talk about radical democratization, I'm talking about people less dependent on government and having more control over their lives, because you will never have the same voice in your government as some big corporation has. Never.
Mr. Kafakis.
Well, I will follow what Dr. Pistrui said before. I mean, we have the Greek experience. He said that the less government is the better government. I mean, looking what has happened to our country, who is responsible for all that mess? You could say the private sector has, a part of responsibility, but only the part of the private sector which was involved with the government. Therefore, I will stay to what he said. The less government is the better government. That's it.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Kafakis. Another question from the audience? Yes, please. Please, you can take the microphone.
Yeah, I have one short question for Mr. Matt Kibe. Does the Tea Party movement in United States, it is movement for free market, does it manage to solve problem in the United States?
Well, if you understand that politicians respond to incentives and they have an incentive to get reelected, the antidote to that is organizing and creating a constituency for your agenda. I think what's unique about the Tea Party movement in the United States, it's not unique in the world, is now because of the lowering costs of information, of your ability to connect with each other through Facebook, you can literally create a constituency of people that want nothing from the government except for it to stop spending money it doesn't have. This flips special interest politics on its head. That's what the Tea Party has done. The Tea Party has had a tremendous influence on elections because they're organized, because they organize in a very cost-effective way and have beat the corporate interests, have beat the two political parties in a way that couldn't have been possible 5 years ago. I think that's transformative. It's not about the Tea Party, it's about the democratization of politics.
Thanks a lot for your answer. Next question. Yep.
Good evening. Mr. Karfakis said that one solution from breaking through the economic slump was to reduce the salaries in order to be competitive in the European Union and worldwide. But when the internal devaluation of our country hadn't showed any results, when the prices still are the same, and I could say that they're the values of the products we buy is up. You know.
Perhaps you mean that austerity doesn't work.
No, I mean that how do the reduction of the salaries could
Yes.
give a result when the internal devaluation hadn't given a result. The people in the country cannot afford their lives with their salaries.
Okay. Mr. Grafakis.
Well, I don't know. Actually, what I try to say is that Greece is an expensive country. I mean, if we want, today it has happened something which some of the audience does not know. Three big countries in the ASEAN, China, Japan, and South Korea, join forces and start talks about free trade. Do you know what that means? You know what this combination of three powers means for Europe? I mean, Europe should wake up. We are going to lose jobs, we are going to lose prosperity, and all the wealth is going to fly to Asia. Europe is a very inexpensive region. Greece is extremely expensive. I mean, if we don't see the truth, then we cannot find a solution. I mean, this is, let's suppose, a set of ideas. It's not only the labor costs. It's only, for example, targeting FDI, increasing productivity, fiscal consolidation. Because Greek people says, we don't want the referendum, but we want to stay in the euro. But that's not, it's like we say, please, could you give your money and we can manage the way we prefer. Let's put ourselves to the other European citizens who are willing to finance our standards of living. Let's be in the position of a Dutch pension fund who has invested in Greek bonds, and that fund has lost money. What can we say to the pensioners in other countries? Therefore, I think we should be very responsible, not only for ourselves, also for the Eurozone. We are not alone. We are part of a family. And we should, as members of the family, we should respect the family. Otherwise, we should split up.
I'd like to thank you for your answer. Next question. Up.
Thank you. A question to Professor Karfakis. Cutting down public spending is a prerequisite to reach fiscal consolidation and restore credibility in the Greek economy. Is that politically feasible in a country where the wages of so many voters are dependent on public spending?
I think this is a very interesting question. Actually, what we observe in Greece is the last part of a drama, which started in 2009. If you ask me what could have been done and to solve somehow the problem which was in Greece, I would say in 2009, the government which took over from the first elections then, it had to follow a shock therapy program. You know what I mean by shock therapy? Letting unemployment rate to go up to 30%, make structural reforms, and then by following what the other panelist says, then the unemployment rates, then we would come down to rates below 10 or even 7% by now. And now Greece would be in a better path. But the political system in Greece was not very powerful because the political system always followed partisan politics, playing around. And that's the mess we experience now. So that's my view about your question.
All right. Thanks a lot. Let's take a question from upstairs.
What I would like to ask the honorable speakers is... What?
Excuse me, I'm upstairs.
Yeah, I'm here. Hello, good evening. I have one question for Mr. Matt Kib, maybe. Well, you said in your previous talk that in the United States you had the same crisis, and you have right here the same crisis. So why is it obvious here more in every other country in the whole world, here in Greece?
The only reason it's more obvious here is you guys are a little bit further down the path than we are. But we have the same generational conflict where the government has made all of these promises, particularly pertaining to health care and retirement, with shifting demographics. So there's fewer and fewer young people paying for more and more services. And we're 5-10 years from where you are today. The problem with waiting is the longer you wait to fix these problems, the longer you wait to let young people into a different type of system that they have more control over, is the transition becomes more painful. But in the United States, we have about $100 trillion of unfunded liabilities, promises that the government has made that don't even show up on our books. If you add that 100 trillion to our current national debt, which is about 15 trillion, our debt to GDP ratio is much higher than yours. So trust me, I hope we solve this problem together.
We have time for one or more or two more questions. Let's take a question for the center. Yes? The microphone. The microphone, please.
Good afternoon. My question is addressed to Mr. Kibe. I quote, you said that we need to shift from a collective system to an individual system, and from a system of defined benefit to a system of defined contribution. My question, here, is whether it is realistic to believe that if we start taking care of ourselves, we would also take care and protect the whole society. Because when starting to trying to protect yourself in the society, you will always have a conflict of interest with someone else. How are the balances there?
That is a great question. And it's a fundamental question that gets to the debate between individualism versus collectivism. My own view is that it's very difficult to imagine a compassionate community that doesn't respect the individual. And we have this playing out in the United States right now, where the fights that we have through our collective system really deteriorate anybody's willingness to help anybody else, because you've outsourced compassion. Compassion is now the job of the government. They'll take care of it. We're going to take care of ourselves. And you end up with all of these constituencies, all of whom have what they believe are the most legitimate claims, going to the government saying, take care of me first. We don't have money to take care of everybody. But the notion that you can enforce compassion through government, which is force. Government is the means by which we force people to do things that they wouldn't do voluntarily. So you're literally talking about compassion at the end of a gun. You're talking about forcing people to do something through a middleman that somebody somewhere has decided is compassionate. But there are limits to that. I think community comes from respect for the individual. You don't help other people if they're trying to hurt you, if they're trying to take your stuff.
Oh, let's take one last question from there. Can you pass the microphone, the gentleman over there?
I think it's open, yes. Thank you very much about your plea to have a change in consciousness, and I quite agree with this. I would say, though, that to have a change in consciousness, it happens with, according to my experience, it happens only in two ways. Either
Please, a little louder,
yes.
a little louder.
In order for your consciousness to change, either you are blessed by God or you undertake great pain. So maybe as a country we are going to undertake a great pain in order for our consciousness to change. But as I saw your figures, I realized that the international markets had suddenly, as the first discusser talked about the interest rates, as I saw, there was a great change in consciousness in the markets, and they started charging a different interest rate for the Greek economy. So maybe we also address this change of the international money markets. What is your opinion?
We actually didn't understand the question.
What's the question?
What's your question? A little help over here.
I thought it was clear.
I mean, what you said is why the international capital markets charge us different rates of interest?
They started to realize that there was a great risk borrowing the Greek economy. They started to realize that they should see the Greek economy having different prospects than the economy of the European Union, and then we should ask a different risk rate, charge a different risk rate. So why should we see our growth opportunities being different from the rest of the Europe? Should the Europe have a different stance for this?
Because the bubble was burst, the balloon was bursted. The Greek economy was following a certain path. As I said before, we were living the golden days. You were in Greece during the last 10 years, I guess. So all of us were living beyond our means. Suddenly, the markets realized that in that little corner down to the southeast of Europe, something peculiar is happening. The people down there is consuming more than they're producing, and they revalued, reassessed the political and country risks. And if the markets change opinions about countries, they demand higher rates to compensate for the coming risk. I don't think it was something magic. It was just the natural path of what was going on during the last 10 years. Maybe it happened, earlier than we expected, but believe me, sometimes I said to my students in the class that salute crisis. I welcomed the crisis which came to my country. You know why? It's because if Greece faced the crisis 10 years later, the debt to GDP ratio would be about 600%. That's the estimate from IMF. So that's a huge figure. Therefore, welcome crisis. I'm ready to change. We should be ready to change. Otherwise, there's no future. Believe me.
Well, with that last question, we conclude our first panel. To sum it up, we had very insightful presentations. As I understand, according to our speakers, the lack of structural reforms, the lack of entrepreneurial spirit, and the rapidly aging population are the main reasons for the crisis we are witnessing. And the youth bears the hope for a change. Let's keep that in mind. I would like to thank all our wonderful speakers, and you for your participation. And in case you want to attend to our second panel, it's beginning in about 5 minutes. Thanks a lot.
Panel titled Harmonization versus